Chapter 3. The Length of Reigns of the Neo-Babylonian Kings. People may believe the most peculiar ideas, not because they are true, but because there is little or no evidence to show that they are false. For many centuries, people believed that the earth was flat, simply because this view could not easily be tested and disproven. Many ideas that have been tied to prophecies in the Bible also definitely belong to this category. These clearly include some appended to Jesus' statement about the times of the Gentiles at Luke 21:24. For example, the Bible nowhere explicitly states, 1. That Jesus, in speaking of these Gentile times, had in mind the 7 times of Nebuchadnezzar's madness mentioned in the book of Daniel, chapter 4. 2. That these 7 times were 7 years. 3. That these years were not ordinary Babylonian calendar years, but prophetic years of 360 days each, and therefore should be summed up as 2,520 days. 4. That these 2,520 days not only applied to the period of Nebuchadnezzar's madness, but also would have a greater fulfillment. 5. That in this greater fulfillment, days should be counted as years so that we get a period of 2,520 years. And 6. That this 2,520-year period started when Nebuchadnezzar, in his 18th regnal year, desolated the city of Jerusalem. None of these 6 assumptions can be verified by clear biblical statements. They are, in fact, nothing but a chain of haphazard guesses. Yet, since the Bible does not discuss or even mention any of these ideas, it nowhere explicitly says they are false either. However, when it is further claimed, 7, that Nebuchadnezzar's desolation of Jerusalem took place in 607 BCE, we have reached a point in the train of thought that can be tested and disproven. This is because the chronology of the Neo-Babylonian period does not fall within the area of unverifiable assumptions. As will be demonstrated in this and the subsequent chapter, the length of the Neo-Babylonian period has been firmly established today by at least 17 different lines of evidence, 14 of which will be discussed in some detail in these 2 chapters. In the previous chapter, it was shown that the validity of the Watchtower Society's prophetic interpretation of the 1914 date is intimately connected with the length of the Neo-Babylonian period. That period ended when Babylon was captured by the armies of the Persian king Cyrus in 539 BCE, an acknowledged, reliable date. In the first year of his reign over Babylon, Cyrus issued an edict which permitted the Jews to return to Jerusalem. According to the Watchtower Society, this ended the 70-year period mentioned at Jeremiah 25:11 and 12, 29:10, Daniel 9:2, and 2 Chronicles 36:21. If, as the Society maintains, the Jewish remnant returned to Jerusalem in 537 BCE, the period of Babylonian domination would have begun 70 years earlier, or in 607 BCE. And, since the Watchtower Society holds this 70-year period to be a period of complete desolation of Judah and Jerusalem, we are told that it was in the year 607 BCE that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem, in his 18th regnal year. This event, it is assumed, started the 2,520 years called the Gentile times, beginning in the year 607 BCE. This starting point, however, is incompatible with a number of historical facts. Subheading A. Ancient Historians. Up to the latter part of the 19th century, the only way to determine the length of the Neo-Babylonian period was by consulting ancient Greek and Roman historians. Those historians lived hundreds of years after the Neo-Babylonian period, and unfortunately, their statements are often contradictory. Those held to be the most reliable are 1. Berossus, and 2. the compilers of the King's List, commonly known as Ptolemy's Canon. Sometimes also, and more correctly, referred to as the Royal Canon. It seems appropriate to begin our discussion with a brief presentation of these 2 historical sources, since, although neither of them by themselves provides conclusive evidence for the lengths of the Neo-Babylonian period, their ancient testimony certainly merits consideration. A1. Berossus. Berossus was a Babylonian priest who lived in the 3rd century BCE. In about 281 BCE, he wrote a history of Babylonia in Greek known as Babyloniaca, or Chaldaica, which he dedicated to the Seleucid king Antiochus I, who lived 281 to 260 BCE, whose vast empire included Babylonia. Later, Berossus abandoned Babylon and settled on the Ptolemaic island of Kos. His writings, unfortunately, have been lost, and all that is known about him comes from the 22 quotations or paraphrases of his work by other ancient writers, and from 11 statements about Berossus made by classical, Jewish, and Christian writers. The longest quotations deal with the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings, and are found in Flavius Josephus' Against Apion, and in his Antiquities of the Jews, both written in the latter part of the 1st century CE, in Eusebius's Chronicle, and in his Preparation for the Gospel, both from the early 4th century CE, and in other late works. It is known that Eusebius quoted Berossus indirectly via the Greco-Roman scholar Cornelius Alexander Polyhistor of the 1st century BCE. Although some scholars have assumed that Josephus, too, knew Berossus only via Polyhistor, the evidence for this is lacking. Other scholars have concluded that Josephus had a copy of Berossus' work at hand, and recently Dr. Gregory E. Sterling has strongly argued that Josephus quoted directly from Berossus' work. Scholars agree that the most reliable of the preserved quotations from Berossus' work are those of Flavius Josephus. Where did Berossus get his information on the Neo-Babylonian kings? According to his own words, he, quote, translated many books which had been preserved with great care at Babylon and which dealt with a period of more than 150,000 years, end quote. These books included accounts of legendary kings before the flood, with very exaggerated lengths of reign. His history of the dynasties after the flood down to the reign of Babylonian king Nabonassar, 747 to 734 BCE, is also far from reliable, and evidently contained much legendary material and exaggerated lengths of reign. Berossus himself indicates that it was impossible to give a trustworthy history of Babylonia before Nabonassar, as that king, quote, collected and destroyed the records of the kings before him in order that the list of Chaldean kings might begin with him, end quote. Despite these problems, however, for later periods, and especially for the critical Neo-Babylonian period, it has been established that Berossus used the generally very reliable Babylonian chronicles, or sources similar to these documents, and that he carefully reported their contents in Greek. The figures he gives for the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings substantially agree with the figures given by those ancient cuneiform documents. Subheading A2, the Royal Canon. Ptolemy's canon, or more correctly, the Royal Canon, is a list of kings and their lengths of reign, beginning with the reign of Nabonassar in Babylon, 747 to 734 BCE, through the Babylonian, Persian, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine rulers. The kings list had been included in the handy tables prepared by the famous astronomer and geographer Claudius Ptolemy from 70 to 165 CE, who ended the list with the contemporary Roman ruler Antoninus Pius, CE 138 to 161. That is why it has become known as Ptolemy's canon. There is, however, evidence that kings' lists of this type must have been in use long before the time of Claudius Ptolemy. The reason why the kings' list could not have originated with Claudius Ptolemy is that a table of this kind was a prerequisite for the research and calculations performed by the Babylonian and Greek astronomers. Without it, they would have had no means for dating the astronomical events their calculations showed as occurring in the distant past. Ancient fragments of such kings' lists written on papyrus have been found. The renowned expert on Babylonian astronomy, F.X. Kubler, concluded that the so-called Ptolemy's canon had evidently been worked out by one or more experts on the Babylonian astronomy and chronology, and through the use in the Alexandrian school successfully had passed scrupulous indirect tests. Dr. Edward Meyer wrote in a similar vein about the canon in 1899, pointing out that, quote, as it belonged to the traditional material of knowledge and of the astronomers, it was inherited from scholar to scholar. Not even Hipparchus of the 2nd century BCE could have gone without that Babylonian list, end quote. This is the reason why Professor Otto Niesbauer termed the expression Ptolemy's canon a misnomer. Quote, "It is a misnomer to call such chronological tables Ptolemaic canon. Ptolemy's Almagest never contained such a canon, in spite of assertions to the contrary often made in modern literature. But we know that the Chronicle of Kings had been included in his handy tables. On the other hand, there is no reason whatsoever to think that royal canons for astronomical purposes did not exist long before Ptolemy." End quote. The canon or king's list was therefore in use centuries before Claudius Ptolemy. It was inherited and brought up to date from one generation of scholars to the next. It should be observed that the canon not only presents a running list of kings and their reigns, in a separate column there is a running summary of the individual reigns all the way from the first king Nabonassar to the end of the list. This system provides a double check of the individual figures, ensuring that they have been correctly copied from one scholar to the next. From what source did the compilers of the royal canon get the king's list? It was evidently compiled from sources similar to those used by Berossus. Friedrich Schmidtke explains, quote, "With respect to the dependence of the sources, the canon of Ptolemy has certainly to a great extent taken its stuff from the Babylonian chronicles. This is clear from the characteristic years of interregnum, which is also found in the chronicle. While the king's list A at this place introduces Sennacherib instead, as well as for 2 from 704 to 703, the canon of Ptolemy, like the chronicle, reproduces here the Babylonian tradition, which did not recognize Sennacherib as a legitimate king, as he had sacked and destroyed Babylon." End quote. There's also some evidence that the royal canon reflects not only Babylonian chronicles, but also ancient Babylonian kings lists, compiled by Babylonian scribes. Thus, scholars have concluded that it was based upon Babylonian chronicles and kings lists, probably through intermediary sources, but evidently independent of Berossus. This is a very important conclusion, as the figures given in the canon for the Neo-Babylonian kings are in substantial agreement with Berossus' earlier figures. Thus, we have two independent witnesses reflecting the length of the Neo-Babylonian era set out in the ancient chronicles. And even if those chronicles are only partially preserved on cuneiform tablets, their figures for the lengths of reign of the Neo-Babylonian kings have to all appearances been correctly transmitted to us via Berossus and the royal canon. The royal canon omits Labashi Marduk, as it always reckons whole years only. Labashi Marduk's short reign of only a few months fell in Neriglesser's last year. I need to edit this out. 13 minutes. Subheading B, the cuneiform documents. Today, historians do not need either Berossus or the royal canon in order to fix the length of the Neo-Babylonian period. Its length may be firmly established in many other ways, thanks to the numerous cuneiform documents discovered from this period. It is a remarkable fact that more cuneiform documents have been excavated from the Neo-Babylonian period than from any other pre-Christian era. Literally, tens of thousands of texts have been found, primarily consisting of business, administrative, and legal documents. But there are also historical documents, such as chronicles and royal inscriptions. Most important are the discovery of astronomical cuneiform texts, recording dated observations of the moon and the planets from the period. Most of this material is written in the Akkadian language and has been unearthed in Mesopotamia since the middle of the 19th century. The first group of documents of interest to us fall within the category shown on the following page, with others on subsequent pages. Subheading B1, Chronicles, Kings Lists, and Royal Inscriptions. A. Neo-Babylonian Chronicles. A chronicle is a form of historical narrative covering a sequence of events. Several cuneiform chronicles covering parts of Neo-Babylonian history have been discovered, all of which are kept in the British Museum, London. Most of them are probably copies of or extracts from original documents written contemporary with the events. The most recent translation of them has been published by A.K. Grayson in Assyrian and Babylonian Chronicles. What do these chronicles consist of? With respect to the contents of the chronicles, Grayson explains, quote, "The narrative is divided into paragraphs, with each paragraph normally devoted to one regnal year. The text is concerned only with matters related to Babylonia, and in particular, her king. and the events, which are almost exclusively political and military in character, are narrated in an objective and laconically dry manner. End quote. Most of the chronicles are incomplete. The extant, actually existing, parts of Chronicles 2 through 7 cover the following regnal years. There's a table showing the lengths of reign of Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, Neriglissar, and Nabonidus. In all, the Neo-Babylonian period, from 625 to 539 BCE, includes a total of 87 regnal years. As is seen in the preceding table, less than half of these years are covered by the preserved parts of the Chronicles. Yet, some important information may be gathered from them. Chronicle 5, known as BM 21946, shows that Nabopolassar ruled Babylon for 21 years, and that he was succeeded by his son, Nebuchadnezzar. That part of the text says, quote, "For 21 years Nabopolassar ruled Babylon. On the 8th day of the month, Ab, he died. In the month of Elul, Nebuchadnezzar II returned to Babylon, and on the first day of the month he ascended the royal throne in Babylon." End quote. The last chronicle, BM 35382, the famous Nabonidus Chronicle, covers the reign of Nabonidus, who was the father of Belshazzar. This chronicle, unfortunately, is damaged. The portion covering Nabonidus' 12th year to his 16th year of rule is lacking, and the portion where the words for 17th year, no doubt originally could be read, is damaged. Notably, however, for the 6th year, it is stated that Cyrus, king of Anshan, defeated the Median king Astyages and captured Ecbatana, the capital of Media. If Nabonidus ruled for 17 years, and if he was dethroned by Cyrus in 539 BCE, his first year must have been 555 to 54 BCE, and his 6th year, when Cyrus conquered Media, must have been 550 to 49 BCE. The Watchtower Society, in fact, agrees with these datings. The reason is that the secular basis of its chronology, 539 BCE, as the date for the fall of Babylon, is directly connected with the reign of Cyrus. The Greek historian Herodotus, in the 5th century BCE, says that Cyrus' total rule was 29 years. As Cyrus died in 530 BCE, in the 9th year of his rule over Babylonia, his first year as king of Anshan must have begun in 559 BCE, or about 3 years before Nabonidus acceded to the throne of Babylon. Suppose now that 20 years have to be added to the Neo-Babylonian era, which is required if the destruction of Jerusalem is set at 607 rather than 587 BCE, and that we add these 20 years to the reign of Nabonidus, making it 37 years instead of 17. Then his first year must have been 575 to 74 BCE instead of 555-54. Nabonidus' 6th year, when Astyages was defeated by Cyrus, would then be moved back from 550 to 49 to 570-69 BCE. Those dates, however, are impossible, as Cyrus did not come to power until circa 559 BCE, as was shown above. He clearly could not have defeated Astyages 10 years before he came to power. This is why the Society correctly dates this battle to 550 BCE, thereby indicating Nabonidus' reign of 17 years to be correct, as is held by all authorities and classical authors. Though the chronicles available do not furnish a complete chronology for the Neo-Babylonian period, the information which they do preserve supports the dates for the lengths of the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings given by Berossus and the royal canon, as the earlier presented evidence strongly indicates that both of these sources derived their information from the Babylonian chronicles independent of each other. And as their figures for the Neo-Babylonian reigns agree, it is logical to conclude that the chronological information originally given in the Neo-Babylonian chronicles has been preserved unaltered by Berossus and the royal canon. Even if this is agreed upon, however, can the information given by these Babylonian chronicles be trusted? It is often pointed out that the Assyrian scribes distorted history in order to glorify their kings and gods. It is a well-known fact that in Assyrian royal inscriptions, a serious military setback is never openly admitted. Sometimes scribes garbled the narration by changing the date of a defeat and weaving it into an account of a later battle. Do the Neo-Babylonian chronicles treat history in this way too? Dr. A.K. Grayson, a well-known authority on the Assyrian and Babylonian chronicles, concludes, quote, "Unlike the Assyrian scribes, the Babylonians neither fail to mention Babylonian defeats, nor do they attempt to change them into victories. The chronicles contain a reasonably reliable and representative record of important events in the period with which they are concerned." End quote. We have reasons for assurance, then, that the figures for the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings given by these chronicles and preserved to our time, thanks to Berossus and the royal canon, represent the actual reigns of these kings. This conclusion will be confirmed over and over again in the further discussion. Subheading B, Babylonian king lists. A cuneiform king list differs from a chronicle in that it is usually a list of royal names with the addition of regnal years, similar to the later royal canon. Although a number of kings lists, both from Assyria and Babylonia, have been unearthed, only one of them covers the Neo-Babylonian era, the Uruk king list, shown on the following page. Unfortunately, as can be seen, it is badly preserved, and some portions of it are missing. Nonetheless, as will be demonstrated, it has definite historical value. The preserved portions cover the periods from Candelanu to Darius I, or 647 to 486 BCE, and on the reverse side, from Darius III to Seleucus II, or 335 to 226 BCE. It was evidently composed from older sources sometime after the reign of Seleucus II. The Uruk king list was discovered during the excavations at Uruk, modern Warqa in southern Iraq, in 1959 to 1960, together with about 1,000 other cuneiform texts, mostly economic texts from different periods. The preserved portion of the obverse, the front or principal side, which includes the Neo-Babylonian period, gives the following chronological information. Damaged or missing portions are indicated by quotation marks or parentheses. 21 years, Candelanu, King Candelanu. 1 year, Sinshun-Lishur and Sinshar-Ishkun. 21 years, Nabopolassar. 43 years, Nebuchadnezzar. 2 years, Awul-Marduk. 3 years, 8 months, Neriglissar. 3 months, Labishi-Marduk. 17 years, Nabonidus. So as is seen, the royal names and the preserved figures for the Neo-Babylonian period agree with those of Berossus and the royal canon. Nabopolassar is given 21 years, Nebuchadnezzar 43 years, Awul-Marduk or Evil-Marduk 2 years. The only deviation is the length of Labashi-Marduk's reign, which is given as 3 months, against Berossus' 9 months. The smaller figure is without doubt correct, as is proved by the economic documents unearthed. In contrast to the royal canon, which always gives whole years only, the Uruk king list is more specific, in also giving months for the reigns of Neriglissar and Labashi-Marduk. The damaged figures for Neriglissar and Nabonidus may be restored or reconstructed as 3 years, 8 months, and 17 years, respectively. The economic texts also indicate Neriglissar's reign to have been 3 years and 8 months, from August of 560 to April of 556 BCE. Thus, once again, we find the figures of Berossus and the royal canon confirmed by this ancient document, the Uruk king list. Admittedly, this king list was composed from older documents, more than 300 years after the end of the Neo-Babylonian era. On this basis, it might be argued that scribal errors may have crept into it. So it's important to ask, are there then no historical records preserved from the Neo-Babylonian era itself, which establish its chronology? Yes, there are, as is immediately evident. Subheading C, Royal Inscriptions. Royal inscriptions of different kinds, building inscriptions, votive inscriptions, annals, etc., from the Assyrian and Babylonian eras themselves have been found in great numbers. In 1912, a German translation of the then known Neo-Babylonian inscriptions was published by Stephen Langdon, but since then many new ones from the period in question have been unearthed. A new translation of all the Neo-Babylonian royal inscriptions is therefore being prepared. This is an enormous task. Paul Richard Berger estimates that about 1,300 royal inscriptions, 1/3 of which are undamaged, have been found from the Neo-Babylonian period, most of them from the reigns of Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar. For the chronology that we are concerned with, 3 of the inscriptions are especially valuable. All of them are original documents from the reign of Nabonidus. How do they aid in establishing the critical date for Jerusalem's destruction? We've seen that in advocating a 607 BCE date, the Watchtower Society questions the reliability of the duration of the Neo-Babylonian period as presented by both Berossus and the Royal Canon, often called Ptolemy's Canon, finding the total 20 years too short. The first of the royal inscriptions to be discussed, called Nabonidus number 18, confirms the length of the reign for that king as found in those ancient sources. The second cuneiform tablet, Nabonidus number 8, clearly establishes the total length of the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings up to Nabonidus, and enables us to know both the beginning year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign and the crucial year in which he desolated Jerusalem. The third, Nabonidus number 24, provides the length of the reign of each Neo-Babylonian king from the first ruler, Nabopolassar, onward, and down to the 9th year of the last ruler, Nabonidus. Belshazzar was evidently a corrigant with his father Nabonidus at the time of Babylon's fall. Following are the details for each of these cuneiform tablets. 1. Nabonidus number 18 is a cylinder inscription from an unnamed year of Nabonidus. Fulfilling the desire of Sin, the moon god, Nabonidus dedicated a daughter of his named Ennigaldi Nana to this god as priestess at the Sin temple of Ur. The important fact here is that an eclipse of the moon, dated in the text to Ululu 13 and observed in the morning watch, led to this dedication. Ululu, the 6th month in the Babylonian calendar, corresponds to the parts of August and September, or sometimes parts of September and October, in our calendar. The inscription explicitly states that the moon set while eclipsed. That is, the eclipse began before and ended after the sunrise. Its end, therefore, was invisible at Babylon. Of what significance is all this? When sufficient details about a lunar eclipse are available, and it is known that the eclipse occurred within a certain limited time period in the past, astronomical movements are so precise that the date of a specific eclipse in a particular area can be determined accurately. Since the details here meet the requirement, when during Nabonidus' reign did the eclipse described on the ancient tablet take place? In 1949, Hildegard Louis examined the eclipse and found that only once during Nabonidus' reign did such an eclipse take place at this time of the year, that is, on September 26th, 554 BCE, on the Julian calendar. The eclipse began about 3 a.m. and lasted for about 3 hours. If Nabonidus ruled for 17 years and his first year was 555-54 BCE, as is generally held, the eclipse and the dedication of Nabonidus' daughter took place in his second regnal year, 554-53 BCE. A remarkable confirmation of this dating was brought to light 20 years later, when W.G. Lambert published his translation of 4 fragments of an inscription from Nabonidus' reign, which he named the Royal Chronicle. The inscription establishes that the dedication of Nabonidus' daughter took place shortly before his 3rd year, and obviously in his 2nd, precisely as Louis had concluded. The lunar eclipse of Ululu 13, then, definitely fixes the 2nd year of Nabonidus to 554-53 BCE, and his first year to 555-54 BCE, thus giving a very strong confirmation to the figures for Nabonidus' reign set forth by Berossus and the Royal Canon. Number 2, Nabonidus number 18, or the Hilla stele, was discovered at the end of the 19th century in the neighborhood of Hilla, about 4 miles southeast of the ruins of Babylon. The inscription consists of a report on the accession year and the beginning of the first regnal year of Nabonidus, and may be shown on the basis of internal evidence to have been written toward the middle of his first regnal year, in the autumn of 555 BCE. The information given on this stele alone helps us to establish the total length of the period from Nabopolassar to the beginning of the reign of Nabonidus. How does it do this? In several of his royal inscriptions, numbers 1, 8, 24, and 25 in Tadmor's list, Nabonidus says that in a dream in his accession year, he was commanded by the gods Marduk and Sin to rebuild Eholhol, the temple of the moon god Sin in Haran. In connection with this, the text under discussion, Nabonidus number 8, provides a very interesting piece of confirmation. Quote, concerning Haran and the Eholhol, which had been lying in ruins for 54 years because of its devastation by the Medes, who destroyed the sanctuaries, with the consent of the gods, the time for reconciliation approached, 54 years, when Sin should return to his place. When he returned to his place, Sin, the lord of the tiara, remembered his lofty seat, and as to all the gods who left his chapel with him, it is Marduk, the king of the gods, who ordered their gathering. End quote. The date when the temple Eholhol in Haran was ruined by the Medes is known to us from two different reliable sources, the Babylonian Chronicle 3, BM 21901, and the Haran inscription Nabonidus H1b, also known as the Adad Gupi stele. The chronicle states that in the 16th year of Nabopolassar, in the month Marhishwan, parts of October and November, the Umanmanda, the Medes, who had come to help the king of Akkad, put their armies together and marched to Haran against Ashur-ubal, who had ascended the throne in Assyria. The king of Akkad reached Haran, and he captured the city. He carried off the vast booty of the city and the temple. The Adad Gupi stele gives the same information. Quote, whereas in the 16th year of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, Sin, king of the gods, with his city and his temple, was angry and went up to heaven. The city and the people that were in it went to ruin. End quote. Thus, it is obvious that Nabonidus reckons the 54 years from the 16th year of Nabopolassar to the beginning of his own reign, when the gods commanded him to rebuild the temple. This is an excellent agreement with the figures for the Neo-Babylonian reigns given by Berossus and the royal canon. As Nabopolassar reigned for 21 years, 5 years remained from his 16th year to the end of his reign. After that, Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 43 years, Marduk for 2, and Neriglissar for 4 years before Nabonidus came to power. Labashi Marduk's few months may be disregarded. Summing up these regnal years, 5 plus 43 plus 2 plus 4, we get 54 years exactly, as Nabonidus states on his stele. If, as has been established, Nabonidus' first year was 555 to 54 BCE, Nabopolassar's 16th year must have been 610-609 BCE. His first year, 625 to 24 BCE, and his 21st year and last year, 605-604 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar's first year then was 604 to 603, and his 18th year, when he desolated Jerusalem, was 587-86 BCE, not 607 BCE. These dates agree completely with the dates arrived at from Berossus figures and the royal canon. Consequently, this stele adds its testimony in establishing the total length of the reigns of all Neo-Babylonian kings prior to Nabonidus. The strength of this evidence, produced right during the Neo-Babylonian era itself, cannot be insisted upon too strongly. Number 3, Nabonidus number 24, also known as the Adad Gupi inscription, exists in 2 copies. The first was discovered in 1906 by H. Pognon at Eski Haran in southeast Turkey, in the ruins of an ancient city of Haran, known as Haran in Abraham's time. The stele, now in the Archaeological Museum at Ankara, is a grave inscription evidently composed by Nabonidus for his mother, Adad Gupi. The text not only includes a biographical sketch of Nabonidus' mother from the time of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal and on to the 9th year of Nabonidus, when she died, but also gives the length of reign of each of the Neo-Babylonian kings, except, of course, of Nabonidus himself, who was still living. Unfortunately, in the first copy, the portion of the text setting out the reigns is damaged, and the only readable figures are the 43 years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign and the 4 years of Neriglissar's reign. However, in 1956, Dr. D.S. Rice discovered 3 other stelae at Haran from the reign of Nabonidus, one of which bore a duplicate inscription of the one discovered in 1906. Fortunately, the sections of the new stele containing the chronological information were not damaged. The first of these sections reads as follows, quote, "From the 20th year of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, when I was born, until the 42nd year of Ashurbanipal, the 3rd year of his son Ashur-etil-ili, the 21st year of Nabopolassar, the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, the 2nd year of Awil-Merodach, the 4th year of Neriglissar, during all these 95 years in which I visited the temple of the great god Sin, king of all the gods in heaven and in the netherworld, he looked with favor upon my pious good works and listened to my prayers, accepted my vows." End quote. It should be observed that the first two kings, Ashurbanipal and his son Ashur-etil-ili, were Assyrian kings, while the following kings were Neo-Babylonian kings. This indicates that Adad-Gupi first lived under Assyrian rule, but then, in connection with Nabopolassar's revolt and liberation of Babylonia from the Assyrian yoke, was brought under Babylonian rule. Nabonidus' mother lived to be a centenarian, and further on in the text, a complete summary of her long life is given. Quote, "He, the moon god Sin, added to my life many days and years of happiness, and kept me alive from the time of Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, to the 9th year of Nabonidus, king of Babylon, the son whom I bore, 104 happy years, spent in that piety which Sin, the king of all gods, has planted in my heart." End of quote. This queen died in the 9th year of Nabonidus, and the mourning for the deceased mother is described in the last column of the inscription. Interestingly, the same information is also given in the Nabonidus Chronicle, BM 35382. Quote, "The 9th year, on the 5th day of the month, Nisan the queen mother died in Dur-Karashu, which is on the bank of the Euphrates upstream from Sippar." End quote. All the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings are given in this royal inscription, from Nabopolassar and on to the 9th year of Nabonidus, and the lengths of reign are in complete accordance with the royal canon, a very significant fact because the corroboration comes from a witness contemporary with all these Neo-Babylonian kings and intimately connected with all of them. More so than the individual testimony of any one source, it is the harmony of all these sources which is most telling. The results from our discussion of the Neo-Babylonian historical records are summarized in the following table. King Nabopolassar, 21 years, from 625 to 605 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar, 43 years, from 604 to 562. Awil-Marduk, 2 years, from 561 to 60. Neriglissar, 4 years, from 559 to 56. Labashi-Marduk, just a few months, in 556. Nabonidus, 17 years, 555 to 539. As may be seen from the table, the Neo-Babylonian chronology adopted by secular historians is very strongly supported by the ancient cuneiform sources, some of which were produced during the Neo-Babylonian era itself. 3 different lines of evidence in support of this chronology are provided by these sources. 1. Although important parts of the Neo-Babylonian chronicles are missing and some figures in the Uruk king list are partially damaged, the combined witness of these documents strongly supports the Neo-Babylonian chronologies of Berossus and the royal canon, both of which were actually, independently of each other, derived from Neo-Babylonian chronicles and kings lists. 2. The royal inscription, Nabonidus number 18, and the royal chronicle fix the 2nd year of Nabonidus astronomically to 554-53 BCE. The whole length of the Neo-Babylonian period prior to Nabonidus is given by Nabonidus number 8, which gives the elapsed time from the 16th year of Nabopolassar up to the accession year of Nabonidus as 54 years. The stele thus fixes the 16th year of Nabopolassar to 610-609, and his first year to 625-24 BCE. These 2 inscriptions therefore establish the length of the whole Neo-Babylonian era. 3. The Adad-Gupi inscription gives the reigns of all the Neo-Babylonian kings, except for Labashi-Marduk's brief months-long reign, which may be disregarded, from Nabopolassar up to the 9th year of Nabonidus. As the Watchtower Society indirectly accepts a 17-year rule for Nabonidus, this stele of itself overthrows their 607 BCE date for the desolation of Jerusalem. Thus, the Babylonian chronicles, the Uruk kings list, and the royal inscriptions firmly establish the length of the Neo-Babylonian era. And yet this is just a beginning. We must still wait to be introduced to the strongest lines of evidence in support of the chronology presented in the table above. Their added testimony should establish beyond any reasonable question the historical facts of the matter. Subheading B2, Economic, Administrative, and Legal Documents. Literally hundreds of thousands of cuneiform texts have been excavated in Mesopotamia since the middle of the 19th century. The overwhelming majority of them concern economic, administrative, and private legal items such as promissory notes, contracts for the sale, lease, or gift of land, houses, and other property, or for the hiring of slaves and livestock, and records of lawsuits. These texts are to a great extent dated, just as are commercial letters, contracts, receipts, and other vouchers today. The dating is done by giving the year of the reigning king, the month, and the day of the month. A text concerning ceremonial salt from the archives of the temple Iana in Uruk, dated in the first year of Abel-Marduk, the evil Merodach of 2 Kings 25:27-30. Written Amel-Marduk in Akkadian, but post-vocalic M was pronounced as W, is given here as an example. Quote, Inasila has brought 1 1/2 talents of salt, the regular Satuku offering of the month of Simon for the god Usur Amasu, month of Simanu, 6th day, first year of Amel-Marduk, the king of Babylon. Tens of thousands of such dated texts have been unearthed from the Neo-Babylonian period. According to the well-known Russian Assyriologist M.A. Dandamev, over 10,000 of these texts had been published prior to 1991. Many others have been published since, but the majority of them are still unpublished. Professor D.J. Wiseman, another leading Assyriologist, estimates that, quote, there are probably some 50,000 texts published and unpublished for the period 627 to 539 BCE, end quote. Thus, there exist large numbers of dated tablets from every year during the whole Neo-Babylonian era. Dr. Wiseman's estimate would give an average of nearly 600 dated texts from each of the 87 years from Nabopolassar to Nabonidus inclusive. It is true that among these texts there are many that are damaged or fragmentary, and that dates are often illegible or missing. Further, the texts are not evenly distributed throughout the period, as the number gradually increases and culminates in the reign of Nabonidus. Nonetheless, every single year throughout the whole period is covered by numerous, often hundreds, of tablets that are datable. Because of this abundance of dated texts, modern scholars are able to determine not only the length of reign of each king, but also the time of the year when each change of reign occurred, sometimes almost to the day. The last known texts from the reign of Neriglissar, for example, are dated I-24 and I-64. That is month 1, day 2, and day 6, year 4, corresponding to April 12th and 16th, 556 BCE on the Julian calendar. And the earliest one from the reign of his son and successor Labashi-Marduk is dated 123, which accords with May the 3rd, 556 BCE. The last text from the reign of Nabonidus is dated VII 1717, which corresponds to October the 13th, 539, or one day after the fall of Babylon, given as VII 1617 in the Nabonidus Chronicle. The reason for the overlap of one day before Babylon's fall is easily explained. Quote, interestingly enough, the last tablet dated to Nabonid from Uruk is dated the day after Babylon fell to Cyrus. News of its capture had not yet reached the southern city, some 125 miles distant, end quote. In view of this immense amount of documentary evidence, the question must be asked, if 20 years have to be added to the Neo-Babylonian era in order to place the destruction of Jerusalem in 607 BCE, where are the business and administrative texts dated in those missing years? Quantities of dated documents exist for each of Nebuchadnezzar's 43 years, for each of Awil-Marduk's 2 years, for each of Neriglissar's 4 years, and for each of Nabonidus' 17 regnal years. In addition, there are many dated texts from the Bashi-Marduk's reign of only about 2 months. If any of these kings' reigns had been longer than those just mentioned, large numbers of dated documents would certainly exist for each of those extra years. Where are they? 20 years are about 1/5 of the whole Neo-Babylonian period. Among the tens of thousands of dated tablets from this period, many thousands ought to have been found from those missing 20 years. If one casts one die of a pair of dice tens of thousands of times without ever getting a 7, he must logically conclude there is no number 7 on this die. The same is true of the Watchtower's 20 missing ghost years, for which one must look in vain during the Neo-Babylonian period. But suppose that a number of missing years really existed, and that by some incredible chance, the many thousands of dated tablets that ought to be there have not been found. Why is it then that the lengths of reign, according to the dated tablets which have been unearthed, happen to agree with the figures of Berossus, those of the royal canon, of the Uruk king list, of the contemporary royal inscriptions, as well as the figures of all the other evidence that is yet to be presented below? Why should it be that, whatever type of historical source is considered, the supposedly missing years consistently amount to exactly 20 years? Why not a period of, in one case, 17 years, and another case, 13, and yet another 7 years, or perhaps different isolated years distributed throughout the Neo-Babylonian period? Each year, new quantities of dated tablets are unearthed, and catalogs, transliterations, and translations of such texts are frequently published, but the 20 missing years never turn up. Even improbability has a limit. The importance of the economic, administrative, and legal texts for the chronology of the Neo-Babylonian period can hardly be overestimated. The evidence provided by these dated texts is simply overwhelming. The reigns of all the Neo-Babylonian kings are copiously attested by tens of thousands of such documents, all of which were written during this era. As shown by the table below, these reigns are in full agreement with the royal canon and the other documents discussed earlier. Subheading B3, Prosopographical Evidence. Prosopography, from the Greek word prosopon, meaning face or person, may be defined as the study of careers, especially of individuals linked by family, economic, social, or political relationships. As the names of many individuals often recur in the business and administrative documents, sometimes hundreds of times during the entire Neo-Babylonian period, scholars usually apply the prosopographical method in their analysis of these texts. Such an approach not only contributes to the understanding of the structures and social life of the Neo-Babylonian society, but it also provides additional internal evidence in support of the established chronology of the period. Of the tens of thousands of documents from the Neo-Babylonian era, more than half are the results of temple activities and have been found in temple archives, particularly in the archives of the Eanna Temple in Uruk, the temple of the goddess Ishtar, and the Ibabar Temple in Sippar, the temple of Shemesh, the sun god. But many thousands of texts also come from private archives and libraries. The richest private archives are those of the Igibi and Nursin houses, centered in the Babylon area. Other private archives have been found, for example, in Uruk, the sons of Bel Ushalim and Nabu Ushalim and Bel Supe Muhur, in Borsippa, I'm not going to say all those names, and in Ur. No state archives have been found from the Neo-Babylonian period, the reason being that at this time such documents are known to have been written in Aramaic on leather and papyrus, materials that were easily destroyed by the climatic conditions in Mesopotamia. Consider now how a study of certain of these available archives can yield valuable information of a chronological nature. Subheading A, the Igibi business house. By far the largest private archive of the Neo-Babylonian period is that of the Igibi business house. Of this enterprise, Bruno Meisner says, quote, "From the firm the Sons of Igibi, we possess such an abundance of documents that we are able to follow nearly all business transactions and personal experiences of its heads from the time of Nebuchadnezzar up to the time of Darius the First. End quote. The business documents from the Igebe house were discovered by Arabs during the wet season of the year 1875 to 76 in a mound in the neighborhood of Hilla, a town about 4 miles southeast of the ruins of Babylon. Some 3,000 or 4,000 tablets were discovered enclosed in a number of earthen jars, resembling common water jars, covered over the top with a tile and cemented with bitumen. The discoverers brought the tablets to Baghdad and sold them to a dealer there. In that same year, George Smith visited Baghdad and acquired about 2,500 of these important documents for the British Museum. The tablets were examined during the following months by W. St. Chad Boscawen, and his report appeared in 1878 in the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology. Boscawen states that the tablets, quote, relate to the various monetary transactions of a Babylonian banking and financial agency trading under the name of Igebe and Sons, end quote. The tablets, quote, relate to every possible commercial transaction from the loan of a few shekels of silver to the sale or mortgage of whole estates whose value is thousands of mans of silver, end quote. Boscawen soon realized the importance of following the sequence of the heads of the Igebe firm, and after a more careful analysis he ascertained the main lines of the succession to be as follows. From the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, a person named Shula acted as head of the Igebe firm, and continued in that capacity for a period of 20 years, up to the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar when he died, and was succeeded by his son, Nabu-Ahedina. The son, Nabu-Ahedina, continued as the head of affairs for a period of 38 years, that is, from the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar to the 12th year of Nabonidus, when he was succeeded by his son, Iti-Marduk-Balatu. Iti-Marduk-Balatu, in his turn, remained head of the firm until the 1st year of Darius the First, 521 to 20 BCE, which was the 23rd year of his headship of the firm. Boscawen epitomizes these findings as follows, quote, now summing up these periods, we get the result that from the 3rd year of Nebuchadnezzar II to the 1st year of Darius Hystaspes was a period of 81 years. This would give an interval of 83 years from the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar to the 1st year of Darius. The significant fact is that this agrees exactly with Berossus, the royal canon, and the Neo-Babylonian historical records. Counting backwards 83 years from the 1st year of Darius I brings us to 604 BCE as the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, which agrees completely with the other lines of evidence presented above. The archive of the Igebe house alone would suffice to establish the length of the Neo-Babylonian period. With this extensive set of dated commercial tablets from the archive of one of the Rothschilds of Babylon, there ought to be but little difficulty in establishing once and forever the chronology of this important period of ancient history, wrote Boscawen, already back in 1878. The evidence of these documents leaves no room for a gap in Neo-Babylonian history from Nebuchadnezzar onward, certainly not one of 20 years. The archive, containing tablets dated up to the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, the 2nd year of Ebul-Marduk, the 4th year of Neriglissar, and the 17th year of Nabonidus, gives a complete confirmation of the chronology of Berossus and the royal canon. Since the last century, still other collections of tablets belonging to the Igebe family have been discovered. A number of studies on the Igebe family have been produced, all of which confirm the general conclusions drawn by Boscawen. Thanks to the enormous amount of text from this family, scholars have been able to trace the history not only of the heads of the firm, but also of many other members of the Igebe house, and even family trees have been worked out that extend through the whole Neo-Babylonian period and into the Persian era. The pattern of intertwined family relations that has been established in this way for several generations would be grossly distorted if another 20 years were inserted into the Neo-Babylonian period. Subheading B. Life expectancy in the Neo-Babylonian period. As was shown above in the discussion of the Heransdel, or Nabonidus H1b, Adad-Gupi, the mother of Nabonidus, was born in the 20th year of powerful Assyrian king Ashurbanipal in 649-648 BCE. She died in the 9th year of Nabonidus in 547-46 BCE, at an age of 101 or 102 years, a remarkable lifespan. What would happen to her age if we were to add 20 years to the Neo-Babylonian era? This would necessarily increase the age of Adad-Gupi to 121 or 122 years. The only way to avoid this consequence would be to add the 20 extra years to the reign of her surviving son Nabonidus after her death, making his reign 37 years instead of 17, something the contemporary documents simply do not allow us to do. This is not the only problem of this kind that confronts those who would defend the Watchtower Society's chronology. Many people whose names appear in the business and administrative texts from the Neo-Babylonian period can be traced from text to text almost during the entire period, sometimes even into the Persian era. We find that some of these businessmen, slaves, scribes, must have been 80 or 90 years old or more at the end of their careers. But if we were to add 20 years to the Neo-Babylonian era, we would also be forced to add 20 years to the lives of these people, making them 100 to 110 years old and still active in their occupations. A few examples will follow. Apla, the son of Bel-Edina. A scribe named Apla, son of Bel-Edina, who belonged to the trading house of Agibi, appears for the first time as a scribe in a text dated to the 28th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 577 BCE. Thereafter, his name recurs in many texts dated in the reigns of Nebuchadnezzar, Ewel-Marduk, Neriglissar, Nabonidus, Cyrus, Cambyses, and Darius I. He appears for the first time, or the last time, as a witness in a document, a promissory note, dated to the 13th year of Darius, 509 BCE. That means the career of this scribe may be followed for a period of 68 years, from 577 to 509 BCE. The Russian Assyriologist M.A. Dandamev comments, quote, "He should have been at least 27 years old when he became a scribe. Even if we assume that Apla died, even in the same year when he was referred to for the last time, or soon after, he must have lived about 90 years." End quote. But if we allow 20 years to be added to the Neo-Babylonian era, we would not only increase Apla's age to 110 years or more, we would also be forced to conclude that at this old age he was still active as a scribe. Number 3, Edina Marduk and his wife Ina Esagila Ramat. Two other examples are the businessman Edin Marduk, son of Ikisha, of the family of Nur-Sin, and his wife Ina Asagila Ramat. Edin Marduk appears as director of his business activities for the first time in a text that earlier had been dated to the 8th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 597 BCE. But a recent collation of the original tablet revealed that the year number is damaged and probably should be read as the 28th year, 577 BCE. Edin Marduk then appears in hundreds of dated documents, the last of which is from the 3rd year of Cambyses, 527 BCE. Other documents indicate that he died shortly before the 5th year of Darius I, or 517 BCE. If we assume that he was only 28 years old when he first appeared as director, he must have been about 80 years old at the time of his death. Edin Marduk's wife, Ina Esagila Ramat, survived her husband. She too was involved in business activities. Documents show that she got married to Edin Marduk no later than the 33rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, or 572 BCE. We must assume, therefore, that she was at least 20 years old when she first appears as contracting party in a text dated to Nebuchadnezzar's 34th year, in 571 BCE. She appears for the last time in a text dated to the 15th year of Darius I, or 507 BCE, at which time she must have been at least 84 years old. Again, if we were to add 20 years to the Neo-Babylonian era, we would increase the age of Edina Marduk to about 100 years, and the age of Ina Esagila Ramat to at least 104 years. We would also be forced to hold that she, at this age, was still actively involved in the businesses. Number 4, Daniel the prophet. The Bible also provides some examples of its own. In the accession year of Nebuchadnezzar, 605 BCE, Daniel, then a youth of perhaps 15 to 20 years, was brought to Babylon. He served at the Babylonian court until after the end of the Neo-Babylonian period, being still alive in the 3rd year of Cyrus in 536-35. At that time, he must have been close to 90 years old. If another 20 years were added to this period, Daniel would have been nearly 110 years old. Is it really likely that people during the Neo-Babylonian period frequently reached ages of 100, 110, or even 120 years? True, we sometimes have heard of people in southern Russia or northern India, who are said to be 150 years old or more. But on close examination, all such statements have been proved to be false. The oldest known individual in modern times has been a French woman, Jeanne Calment, who was born on February 21st, 1875, and died on August 4th, 1997, at an age of 122 years. This French woman's record would have been equaled by Adad-Gupi, had that Babylonian woman been 122 years old when she died, instead of about 102, as the ancient records indicate. Considering these cases of exceptionally long age already presented, we rightly ask if we have any reason to believe that the lifespan of people at that time surpassed that of people of today. The Russian Assyriologist M.A. Dandamev has examined the lifespan of people in Babylonia from the 7th through to the 4th century BCE, using tens of thousands of business and administrative texts as the basis for his research. His conclusion is that the lifespan of people at that time was not different from what it is now. In his discussion, Dandamev refers to Psalms 90:10. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80 years. These words were as true in the Neo-Babylonian era as they are today. Consequently, the extremely old ages which would be created by dating the destruction of Jerusalem to 607 instead of 587 BCE provides one more argument weighing against the Watchtower Society's chronology. As has been shown in this section, a prosopographical examination of the cuneiform text strongly supports the chronology established for the Neo-Babylonian period. The careers of businessmen, scribes, temple administrators, slaves, and others may be followed for decades, in some cases through almost the whole Neo-Babylonian period and on into the Persian era. Thousands of dated documents give a profound insight into their everyday activities. Notably, however, the lives and activities of these people never contain reference to any year lying outside the recognized time frame from the Neo-Babylonian period, never overlap or extend beyond this at any time so as to point to a single year of the 20-year period required by the Watchtower Society's chronology. Subheading B4, Chronological Interlocking Joints. There are only two possible ways of extending the Neo-Babylonian period to include the 20 extra years required by the Watchtower chronology. Either the known Neo-Babylonian kings had longer reigns than indicated by all the documents discussed above, or there were other unknown kings who belonged to the Neo-Babylonian era in addition to those known to us from these documents. Both of these possibilities, however, are completely excluded, not only by the several lines of evidence presented so far and the astronomical evidence that will be discussed in the next chapter, but also by a series of texts that inseparably interlock each reign with the next throughout the whole Neo-Babylonian period. 11 such chronological interlocking joints will be discussed below. A. Nabopolassar to Nebuchadnezzar. 1. In the earlier discussion of the Neo-Babylonian Chronicle, one of them, Chronicle 5, was quoted as saying that Nabopolassar, the first Neo-Babylonian king, ruled for 21 years, that he died on the 8th day of the month, Ab, and that on the first day of the next month, Elul, his son Nebuchadnezzar ascended the royal throne of Babylon. At this point, then, there is no room for a longer reign of Nabopolassar beyond the recognized span of 21 years, nor for an extra king between him and Nebuchadnezzar. B. Nebuchadnezzar to Awil-Marduk. 2. That Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded by his son Awil-Marduk, the biblical Evil-Merodach, in the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign is confirmed by a business document, BM 30254, published by Ronald H. Sack in 1972. This document mentions both the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar and the accession year of Awil-Marduk. A girl, Lit-Ka-Idi, the slave of Gugua, was placed at the disposal of Nabu-Aha-Edina, the son of Shula, the descendant of Igibi, in the month of Ajaru, 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and for whom 12 shekels of silver served as security. Later in the same year, in the month of Kislevu, accession year of Amil-Marduk, king of Babylon, Gugua of her own will sold Lit-Ka-Idi to Nabu-Aha-Edina for the full price of 19 1/2 shekels of silver. This document gives no room for a longer reign of Nebuchadnezzar or for an extra king between him and Abu-Marduk. 3. In the Neo-Babylonian period, the yield of a field or garden was often estimated before harvest time. After the harvest, the workers of the field were to turn over the estimated amount to the owners or buyers. Quite a number of documents recording such procedures have been found. One of them, designated AO8561, not only includes estimated yields of numerous fields for 3 successive years, the 42nd and 43rd years of Nebuchadnezzar are the first year of Aul-Marduk, but is also a record of what portions of that yield were received by and distributed to various persons in the month of Kislevu, accession year of Neriglissar. This document then provides another joint or dovetail between the 43rd year of Nebuchadnezzar and the reign of Aul-Marduk. 4. Another similar text, YBC 4038, dated to the month of Adaru, the 12th month, 15th day, accession year of Aul-Marduk, describes the monthly portioning out of 500 bushels of barley at the Iana temple in Uruk from the 43rd year of Nabuchodonosor, or Nebuchadnezzar, to the first year of Aul-Marduk. Again, this text ties together the reigns of Nebuchadnezzar and his successor Aul-Marduk in a way that gives no room for any additional years between the two. The Bible itself confirms that Aul-Marduk's accession year fell in the 43rd year of his father King Nebuchadnezzar. This may be inferred from the datings given in 2 Kings 24:12, 2 Chronicles 36:10, and Jeremiah 52:28 and 31. A brief description of this evidence is included in the appendix for chapter 3. C. Nebuchadnezzar to Aul-Marduk to Neriglissar. 5. In the Neo-Babylonian period, bookkeeping was already an ancient, highly complex, and formalized business. An interesting example of this is a tablet known as NBC 4897. The document is actually a ledger tabulating the annual growth of a herd of sheep and goats belonging to the Iana temple at Uruk for 10 consecutive years from the 37th year of Nebuchadnezzar to the first year of Neriglissar. In the entries for each year, the number of lambs and kids born during the year is added, and the number of animals killed, documented by their hides, or paid to the herdsmen as wages, are subtracted. The grand totals are then given in the column farthest to the right. Thus, it is possible to follow the numerical increase of the herd year by year. The text shows that the herdsman responsible for the herd, Nabu Aheshulam, during the 10 years, succeeded in enlarging the herd from 137 sheep and goats to 922 animals. True, the Babylonian scribe made a few miscalculations and mathematical mistakes, which partially hampers the interpretation of the document. There is no doubt, however, that it is an annual record, as year numbers are given for each successive year. In the entry for the first year of Neriglissar, for example, the grand total column contains the following information. Grand total, 922. First year of Nergal-Shara-Usur, king of Babylon, 9 lambs in Uruk were received, and 3 lambs for shearing. Similar information is given for each year from the 37th year of Nebuchadnezzar to his 43rd year for the first and second years of Aul-Marduk, and as cited for the first year of Neriglissar. This document then not only provides an additional confirmation of the length of reign of Nebuchadnezzar and Aul-Marduk, but it also demonstrates that no extra kings or extra years can be inserted between Nebuchadnezzar and Aul-Marduk, or between Aul-Marduk and Neriglissar. D. Neriglissar to Labashi-Marduk. 6. A cuneiform tablet in the Yale Babylonian collection, YBC 4012, not only shows that Labashi-Marduk succeeded Neriglissar as king, but also that he did this early in the 4th year of his father's short reign. The document records that in the month of Adaru, the 12th month, 3rd year of Nergal-Shara-Usur, king of Babylon, which was from March to April in 556 BCE, Mushezib-Marduk, the overseer of the Iana temple in Uruk, carried a considerable amount of money to Babylon, partly as payment for work and material for the Iana temple. This document was drawn up about 2 months later, evidently at Babylon before Mushezib-Marduk's return to Uruk, and is dated to the, quote, month of Ajaru, the 2nd month of the next year, 22nd day, accession year of Labashi-Marduk, king of Babylon, which is May the 2nd, 556 BCE. According to this document, Labashi-Marduk succeeded to the throne sometime in the first or second month of Neriglissar's fourth year of reign. This is in good agreement with the evidence given by the contract tablets, which show that the demise of the crown occurred in the first month of Neriglissar's fourth year. Subheading E. Neriglissar to Labashi-Marduk to Nabonidus. That Neriglissar was succeeded by his son Labashi-Marduk is plainly stated by Nabonidus in one of the royal inscriptions discussed earlier, Nabonidus number 8, or the Hilla stele. In column 4 of this stele, Nabonidus relates that the cult of the goddess Anunitim in Sippar had been renewed by Neriglissar. Then he goes on saying, quote, after his days had become full and he had started out on the journey of human destiny, his son Labashi-Marduk, a minor who had not yet learned how to behave, sat down on the royal throne against the intentions of the gods, and 3 lines missing here, end quote. After the 3 missing lines, and Nabonidus in the next column goes on to speak of his own enthronement, evidently as the immediate successor of Labashi-Marduk. In doing so, he also names the last 4 of his royal predecessors, Nebuchadnezzar and Neriglissar, whom he regarded as legitimate rulers, and their sons, Awul-Marduk and Labashi-Marduk, whom he regarded as illegitimate usurpers. He states, quote, they carried me into the palace and all prostrated themselves to my feet. They kissed my feet, greeting me again and again as king. Thus I was elevated to rule the country by the order of my lord Marduk, and therefore I shall obtain whatever I desire. There shall be no rival of mine. I am the real executor of the wills of Nebuchadnezzar and Neriglissar, my royal predecessors. Their armies are entrusted to me. I shall not treat carelessly their orders, and I am anxious to please them. Awul-Marduk, son of Nebuchadnezzar, and Labashi-Marduk, son of Neriglissar, called up their troops, and there they dispersed. Their orders, lines 7 and 8 are missing. This inscription then interlinks the reigns of Neriglissar and Labashi-Marduk, and evidently also those of Labashi-Marduk and Nabonidus. The possibility of inserting an extra king somewhere between these 3 kings is ruled out by this text. Some legal documents, too, contain information that spans the reign of 2 or more kings. One example is Nabonidus number 13, which is dated to the 12th day of the month Shabbatu, or the 11th month, the accession year of Nabonidus, king of Babylon, which is February the 2nd, 555 BCE. The inscription tells about a woman, Belilitu, who brought up the following case before the royal court. Quote, Belilitu, daughter of Bel-Ushezib, descendant of the messenger, declared the following to the judges of Nabonidus, king of Babylon. In the month of Abu, the first year of Nergal-Shareser, or Neriglissar, king of Babylon, I sold my slave Bazuzu to Nabu-Ahidin, son of Shula, descendant of Igibi, for 1/2 mina, 5 shekels of silver. But he did not pay cash, and drew up a promissory note. The royal judges listened to her, and commanded that Nabu-Ahidin be brought before them. Nabu-Ahidin brought the contract that he had concluded with Belilitu, and showed the judges the document which indicated that he had paid the silver for Bazuzu. End quote. Reference is thus made to the reigns of Neriglissar and that of Nabonidus. The generally accepted chronology would indicate that about 3.5 years had passed since Belilitu had sold her slave in the first year of Neriglissar until she, in the accession year of Nabonidus, made a fraudulent but futile attempt to receive double payment for the slave. But if 20 years were to be added somewhere between the reigns of Neriglissar and Nabonidus, then Belilitu waited for 23.5 years before she brought her case before the court, something that appears extremely unlikely. Subheading F, Nabonidus to Cyrus. That Nabonidus was the king of Babylon when Cyrus conquered Babylonia in 539 BCE is clearly shown by the Nabonidus Chronicle, BM 35382. The Chronicle evidently dated this event to the 17th year of Nabonidus, but as was pointed out earlier, this portion of the Chronicle is damaged and the year number is illegible. Nonetheless, a whole group of economic texts has been found that provide chronological interlocking connections between Nabonidus' 17th year and the reign of Cyrus. These include the tablets with the catalog numbers CT 56219, CT 57523, and CT 5756. The first of the 3 documents, CT 56219, is dated to the accession year of Cyrus, and the next 2 are dated to his first year. But all three tablets also refer to the preceding king's year 17, and since it is accepted as fact that Nabonidus was the final king of the Neo-Babylonian line preceding Cyrus the Persian's rule, this confirms that Nabonidus' reign lasted 17 years. One of the more graphic examples of a chronological linkage between two reigns is a cuneiform tablet in the Archaeological Museum at Florence, known as SAKF 165. As Professor J.A. Brinkman points out, this document presents a unique year-by-year inventory of woolstuffs made into garments for the cult statues of the deities in Uruk. Furthermore, it covers the vital years before and after the Persian conquest of Babylonia. The inventory is arranged chronologically, and the preserved portion of the text covers 5 successive years from the 15th year of Nabonidus to the 2nd year of Cyrus, with year numbers given at the end of the inventory for each year. The royal name was evidently given only for the first year of each ruler. But as the immediate predecessor of Cyrus was Nabonidus, year 15, year 16, and year 17 clearly refer to his reign. The inventory for the year following upon year 17 ends with the words, Year 1, Cyrus, king of Babylon, king of the lands. The last lines of the entry for the 5th year of inventory are damaged, and year 2 of Cyrus can only be understood as implied. In ancient Mesopotamia, in the various temples, the presence of the deities was represented by their statues. In times of war, when a city was taken, the temples were usually looted and the divine statues were carried away as captives to the land of the conquerors. As such captures were seen by the citizens as an omen that the gods had abandoned the city and called for its destruction, they often tried to protect the statues by moving them to a safer place at the approach of a military force. This is what happened shortly before the Persian invasion of northern Babylonia in 539 BCE, when, according to the Nabonidus Chronicle, Nabonidus ordered gathering of the gods of several cities into Babylon. The same chronicles also tells that Cyrus, after the fall of Babylon, returned the statues to their respective cities. As discussed by Dr. Paul Alain Beaulieu, there are several documents from the archive of the Iana Temple of Uruk which confirm that in the 17th year of Nabonidus, the statue of Ishtar, referred to in the documents as Lady of Uruk, or Lady of the Iana, was brought upstream by boat on the river Euphrates to Babylon. Further, these documents also show that the regular offerings to this statue of Ishtar were not interrupted during her temporary stay at Babylon. Cargoes of barley and other kinds of foodstuff for her cult were sent from Uruk to Babylon. One example of this is given by a tablet in the Yale Babylonian collection, which is dated to the 17th year of Nabonidus and records a deposition before the assembly of the noblemen of Uruk. Quote, "These are the Marbani, noblemen, in whose presence Zereah, son of Ardea, has thus spoken. Bazuzu, son of Ibni Ishtar, descendant of Gimel-Nanaya, has brought a boat from Babylon to lease it for the sum of omitted. And he said thus, I will take the barley for the regular offerings of the Lady of Uruk to Babylon." End quote. City of the Quay of Nanaya, domain of the Lady of Uruk, Abu. The end quote. These documents clearly demonstrate that Cyrus' conquest of Babylon occurred in the 17th year of Nabonidus, which thus once again is proved to have been the last year of his reign. The many examples cited above demonstrate that the activity recorded in a text at times spans over and ties together two successive reigns. They also demonstrate that it is possible to establish the length of the entire Neo-Babylonian era by the aid of such chronological joints alone. In fact, the lengths of reign of some kings, Nebuchadnezzar and Nabonidus, are established by more than one text of this kind. Subheading C. Synchronic links to the chronology of Egypt. An excellent proof of the correctness of a chronology is when it is in agreement with the chronologies of other contemporary nations, provided that these other chronologies are independently established and there are synchronisms, that is, dated connecting links that serve to join the two or more chronologies together at one or more points. The reasons why it is important that they be independently established is to rule out any attempt to discredit their worth by claiming that the chronology of a certain period in one nation has been established simply by the aid of the chronology of the contemporary period in another nation. During the Neo-Babylonian period, there are at least 4 such synchronisms between Egypt, and the kingdoms of Judah and Babylon. Three of these are given in the Bible in 2 Kings 23:29, where Egyptian Pharaoh Necho and Judean King Josiah appear. Jeremiah 46:2, Necho, Nebuchadnezzar, and Jehoiakim all appearing. And Jeremiah 44:30, Pharaoh Hophra, Kings Zedekiah and Nebuchadnezzar listed. The fourth is given in a cuneiform text, BM 33041, which refers to a campaign against Amasis, king of Egypt, in Nebuchadnezzar's 37th regnal year. The meaning of these synchronisms will be unraveled further on. Subheading C1, the chronology of the Saite period. The kings reigning in Egypt during the Neo-Babylonian period belonged to the 26th dynasty, from 664 to 525 BCE. The period of this dynasty is also referred to as the Saite period, or as the pharaohs of this dynasty took the city of Sais in the Delta as their capital. If the four synchronisms mentioned above are to be of any definitive help to our study, it first needs to be shown that the chronology of the 26th dynasty of Egypt is fixed independently from the contemporary Neo-Babylonian chronology and can thus stand on its own, as it were. This can be determined in a quite unusual way, of which Dr. F. K. Kainitz writes, "The chronology of the kings of the 26th dynasty, from Psammetichus I onwards, is completely established through a series of death stelae and stelae of holy Apis bulls, which lists the birth date in day X, month Y, year Z of King A, and the death date in day X, month Y, year Z of King B, and also the length of life of the bull or person in question in years, months, and days. This means that if a death stele says that a sacred Apis bull or a person was born in the 10th year of King A and died at the age of 25 in the 20th year of King B, we know that King A ruled for 15 years. This is the kind of contemporary evidence to which Dr. Kainitz refers. A translation of Kainitz's survey of this material is given here. Consequently, these contemporary death stelae conclusively established the lengths of reign of the first four kings of the 26th dynasty of Egypt as follows. Psammetichus I, 54 years. Necho II, 15 years. Psammetichus II, 6 years. Apries, or Hophra, 19 years. For the last two kings of the 26th dynasty, Amasis and Psammetichus III, material of this kind, unfortunately, is lacking. However, both Greek historian Herodotus and the Greco-Egyptian priest and historian Manetho give 44 years to Amasis and 6 months to Psammetichus III, and these lengths of reign have been confirmed by modern discoveries as follows. In the papyrus Rylands IX, dating from the time of Darius I, 44th year of Amasis is mentioned in a context indicating it was his last full year. Each year, a prophet of Amun of Tuzoi, who lived in the Nile Delta, used to send a representative to fetch his stipend. This he did until the 44th year of Amasis. This in itself is not decisive, but in the Demotic Chronicle, a report on the compilation of Egyptian laws written under Darius I, there are also two mentions of the 44th year of Amasis as some sort of terminal point. Finally, the same figure is given in an inscription from Wadi Hamamat. The figure given by Herodotus and Manetho, therefore, is strongly supported by this combination of inscriptions. As to Psammetichus III, the highest date available for this king is year 2. 3 documents, or papyri, dated to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th month of his second year have been discovered, and yet this is no contradiction to the statement made earlier that the rule of this king actually covered only 6 months. How so? The Egyptians used a non-accession year system. According to this system, the year in which a king came to power was reckoned as his first regnal year. Psammetichus III was dethroned by the Persian king Cambyses during his conquest of Egypt, generally dated to 525 BCE by the authorities. At this time, the Egyptian civil calendar year almost coincided with the Julian calendar year. If the conquest of Egypt occurred in the 6th month of the reign of Psammetichus III, this must have been in May or June 525 BCE. With this prerequisite, his 6 months of rule began at the end of the previous year, 526 BCE, quite possibly only a few days or weeks before the end of that year. Though he ruled for only a fraction of that year, this fraction of a few days or weeks was reckoned as his first regnal year, according to the Egyptian non-accession year system. Thereby, his second regnal year began to count only a few days or weeks after his accession to the throne. Thus, although he ruled for only 6 months, documents dated up to the 5th month of his second year are, in view of the supporting evidence, only what we should expect to find. The following illustration makes the matter plain. As demonstrated by the discussions above, the chronology of the 26th dynasty of Egypt is soundly and independently established. The results are summarized in the following table. From Psammetichus I, 54 years, 664 to 610 BCE. Necho II, 15 years, from 610 to 595. Psammetichus II, 6 years, from 595 to 589. Apries or Hafra, 19 years, from 589 to 570. Amasis, 44 years, from 570 to 526. And Psammetichus III, 1 year, from 526 to 525. Subheading C2, Synchronisms to the chronology of the Sate period. Does the chronology of the Egyptian Sate period square with that of the Neo-Babylonian era as established above? Or instead, does it harmonize with the chronology of the Watchtower Society as presented, for example, in its Bible Dictionary Insight on the Scriptures? The 4 synchronisms to the Egyptian chronology mentioned earlier, the first 3 of these coming from the Scriptures, decide the matter. The first synchronism is 2 Kings 23:29. In his, King Josiah's days, Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, came up to the king of Assyria by the river Euphrates, and King Josiah proceeded to go to meet him. But he put him to death at Megiddo as soon as he saw him. Here it is clearly shown that Judean King Josiah died at Megiddo in the reign of Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. According to the chronology of the Watchtower Society, Josiah's death took place in 629 BCE. But according to clear historical evidence, Necho's reign did not begin until 19 years later, in 610 BCE. So Josiah's death did not take place in 629 BCE, but 20 years later, in 609. The second synchronism, from Jeremiah 46:2. For Egypt, concerning the military force of Pharaoh Necho, the king of Egypt, who happened to be by the river Euphrates at Carchemish, whom Nebuchadrezzar, the king of Babylon, defeated in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah. This battle in the 4th year of Jehoiakim is placed in the year 625 BCE by the Watchtower Society, which again cannot be harmonized with the contemporary chronology of Egypt. But if this battle at Carchemish took place 20 years later, in the accession year of Nebuchadnezzar, that is, in June of 605 BCE, according to all the lines of evidence presented earlier, we find this date to be in perfect harmony with the recognized reign of Pharaoh Necho from 610 to 595. The third synchronism, Jeremiah 44:30, says, "This is what Jehovah has said. Here I am giving Pharaoh Hophra, the king of Egypt, into the hand of his enemies and into the hand of those seeking for his soul, just as I have given Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, his enemy and the one seeking for his soul." As the context shows, these words were uttered not long after the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, when the rest of the Jewish population had fled to Egypt after the assassination of Gedaliah. At that time, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Hophra, or Apries, as he is named by Herodotus. If Apries ruled Egypt at the time when the Jews fled there, some months after the desolation of Jerusalem, this desolation cannot be dated to 607 BCE, for Apries did not begin his reign until 589 BCE. But a dating of the desolation of Jerusalem to 587 BCE is in good agreement with the years of reign historically established for him, 589 to 570. The fourth synchronism, BM 33041. As mentioned earlier, this text refers to a campaign against King Amasis in Nebuchadnezzar's 37th year. A.L. Oppenheim's translation of this scanty fragment reads as follows: "In the 37th year, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Egypt to deliver a battle. Egypt called up his army from the town Putulaman, distant regions which are situated on islands amidst the sea. Many who are in Egypt carrying weapons, horses, and chariots, he called up to assist him, and did, in front of him, he put his trust. unquote. This text is badly damaged, but it does definitely state that the campaign into Egypt took place in Nebuchadnezzar's 37th year. And while it is true that the name of the pharaoh is only partly legible, the cuneiform signs that are preserved seem only to fit Amasis, and no other pharaoh of the 26th dynasty. The Watchtower Society dates the 37th year of Nebuchadnezzar to 588 BCE, but this was during the reign of Apries. On the other hand, if Nebuchadnezzar's 37th year was 568-67 BCE, as is established by all the lines of evidence presented earlier, this date is in excellent agreement with the reign of Amasis from 570 to 526 BCE. Consequently, not one of the four synchronisms with the independently established chronology of Egypt agrees with the chronology developed by the Watchtower Society. The discrepancy in that society's reckoning is consistently about 20 years out of harmony. Interestingly, however, all four synchronisms are in perfect harmony with the dates arrived at from the other lines of evidences that have been discussed. These synchronisms to the Egyptian chronology therefore add yet another line of evidence to the others, which point consistently to 587 BCE as the definitive date for the destruction of Jerusalem. Subheading: Summary and Conclusion. 7 lines of evidence have been presented above against any possible dating of the destruction of Jerusalem to the year 607 BCE, all of which lines of evidence agree in dating that event 20 years later. At least 4 of these lines of evidence are clearly independent of each other. Consider first the 3 which give evidence of interdependence. 1. Early historians, the Neo-Babylonian Chronicles, and the Uruk king list. We first saw that in the 3rd century BCE, Babylonian priest Berossus wrote a history of Babylonia, quoted from by later historians, both in the BCE and early CE periods. The validity of the dates presented by Berossus in his history is evidenced by their accurate reflection of historical material now available on ancient cuneiform tablets unearthed in Babylon, particularly the Neo-Babylonian Chronicles, a series of historical vignettes setting out certain episodes relating to the Babylonian Empire, notably records of kingly succession and of military campaigns waged, and also the Babylonian kings lists, particularly the one known as the Uruk king list, which lists the Babylonian rulers by name, along with the years of their reign. Likewise, with the source known as the Royal Canon, a list of Babylonian rulers which, though only fully extant in manuscripts of Ptolemy's handy tables, dated to the 8th century CE and in later manuscripts, seems clearly to have been the common source relied upon by astronomer Claudius Ptolemy from 70 to 161 CE, and by earlier scholars such as Hipparchus of the 2nd century BCE, when these dealt with and dated events of the Neo-Babylonian period. Though the Royal Canon evidently drew upon sources common to those employed by Berossus, that is, the ancient Neo-Babylonian Chronicles and Kings List, the order and forms of the names of kings found in it differ from his presentation sufficiently to indicate that it is a record developed independently of his writings. It is acknowledged that the Neo-Babylonian Chronicles unearthed up to this point are still incomplete, and also that some of the figures in the Uruk kings list for the reigns of the Neo-Babylonian kings are damaged and only partially legible. However, the figures that are there and are legible on these cuneiform tablets all agree with the corresponding figures found both in the writings of Berossus and in the listing of the Royal Canon. There is, then, strong reason to believe that the chronological information originally given in those Neo-Babylonian sources has been preserved unaltered by Berossus and the Royal Canon. Both of these agree as to the overall length of the Neo-Babylonian era. In the crucial area here under investigation, their figures point to 604-603 BCE as the first year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and 587-86 BCE as his 18th year when he desolated Jerusalem. Though this evidence is substantial, it remains true that Berossus and the Royal Canon are secondary sources, and even those ancient tablets known as the Babylonian Chronicles and the Uruk Kings List are evidently copies of earlier originals. What supporting evidence is there, then, to believe the records involved were actually written contemporaneously with the times and events described? Subheading 2. Inscriptions Nabonidus number 18 and Nabonidus number 8, or the Pilla stele. Aside from the Babylonian Chronicles and King's List, there are other ancient documents which give evidence of being not copies but originals. The royal inscription Nabonidus number 18, dated by the aid of another inscription known as the Royal Chronicle to the second year of Nabonidus, fixes this year astronomically to 554-53 BCE. As Nabonidus' reign ended with the fall of Babylon in 539, the total length of his reign is shown by this inscription to have been 17 years. The whole length of the Neo-Babylonian period prior to Nabonidus is given by Nabonidus number 18, the Hilastel, which gives the time elapsed from the 16th year of initial ruler Nabopolassar up to the accession year of final ruler Nabonidus as 54 years. The stele thus fixes the 16th year of Nabopolassar to 610-609 BCE. If this was Nabopolassar's 16th year, his 21st and last year was 605-04 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar's first year, then, was 604-03 BCE, and his 18th year was 587-86, during which Jerusalem was destroyed. Subheading number 3, Nabonidus H1b, or the Adad-Gupi stele. Nabonidus H1b gives the reigns of all the Neo-Babylonian kings, except for that of Labashi-Marduk, as his brief reign does not affect the chronology presented, from Nabopolassar up to the 9th year of Nabonidus. Since the Watchtower Society indirectly accepts a 17-year rule for Nabonidus, as was shown above in the discussion of the Nabonidus Chronicle, this stele of itself overthrows their 607 BCE date for the desolation of Jerusalem and shows this event to have taken place 20 years later, in 587 BCE. These three lines of evidence may logically be grouped together because it cannot be clearly established that the various documents involved are wholly independent of one another. Reasons for believing that Berossus and the royal canon both got their information from Babylonian Chronicles and King's List have already been pointed out. It is also possible that the chronological information given in the royal inscriptions was derived from the Chronicles, although this is something that cannot be proved. Grayson's suggestion that the Chronicles themselves may have been composed with the help of the information given in the astronomical diaries has been strongly argued against by other scholars. This possible interdependence of some of these sources, however, does not nullify their conclusive power, as the ancient royal inscriptions preserve chronological information that is contemporary with the Neo-Babylonian era itself. We have every reason to accept it as factual and true information. This would be true even if the information was based upon contemporary Babylonian chronicles. For although the chronology of these chronicles is preserved only in a few fragmentary copies, in a late King's List and by Berossus and the royal canon, the agreement between these later sources and the ancient royal inscriptions is striking. This agreement confirms that the figures of the original Neo-Babylonian chronicles have been correctly preserved in these later sources. There remain 4 lines of evidence which have sound claim to independence. Subheading number 4, Economic, Administrative, and Legal Documents. Tens of thousands of economic, administrative, and legal documents dated to the year, month, and the day of the reigning king have come down to us from the Neo-Babylonian period. A large number of dated tablets are extant from each year during this whole period. The length of reign of each king may then be established by these documents, sometimes almost to the day. The results arrived at are in good agreement with the figures given by Berossus, the royal canon, the chronicles, and the contemporary royal inscriptions from the reign of Nabonidus. The 20 years demanded by the chronology of the Watchtower Society are totally missing. The business and administrative documents are original documents, contemporary with the Neo-Babylonian era itself, which makes this line of evidence exceedingly strong. These documents definitely point to 586 BCE as Nebuchadnezzar's 18th regnal year when he desolated Jerusalem. Subheading 5, Prosopographical Evidence. The prosopographical study of the cuneiform tablets provides various checks on the accuracy of the Neo-Babylonian chronology. The careers of scribes, temple administrators, slaves, businessmen, and others may be followed for decades, and in some cases, through almost the whole Neo-Babylonian period and on into the Persian era. Thousands of dated documents give insight into the business, legal, religious, family, and other activities of these individuals. Many texts deal with matters that extend over weeks, months, or even years, such as inventories, lease of land or houses, installments of debts, hire of slaves and livestock, runaway slaves, court proceedings, and so on. The activities of some individuals may be followed through almost their whole lives, but never do we find that their activities cross the established chronology borders of the period into some unknown 20-year period that the Watchtower Society would add to the Neo-Babylonian era. The insertion of these 20 years would in fact not only distort the understanding of the careers, activities, and family relations of many individuals, but it would also give many of them abnormal lifespans. Subheading 6. Chronological interlocking joints. Sometimes a text may contain activities and dates that intersect two or more consecutive reigns in a way that chronologically ties them together and excludes every possibility of inserting extra kings and years between them. As was demonstrated in this particular section, quite a number of such documents exist that interlock each reign with the next throughout the whole Neo-Babylonian period. Although 11 documents of this kind were presented earlier, a close examination of the tens of thousands of unpublished tablets from the Neo-Babylonian period would probably multiply the number. Those presented, however, suffice to show that the length of the whole Neo-Babylonian era may be securely established by the aid of such chronological joints alone. Subheading 7. Synchronisms with the contemporary Egyptian chronology. The chronology of contemporary Egyptian kings provides an excellent test of Neo-Babylonian chronology, as there are 4 synchronisms tied to it, 3 of which are given in the Bible. These synchronisms are of the utmost importance, as the contemporary chronology of Egypt has been established independently of the chronologies of other nations of that time. Yet it was shown that the Egyptian chronology is in complete harmony with the data given by Berossus, the royal canon, and all the cuneiform documents discussed above, while a comparison with the chronology of the Watchtower Society shows a consistent difference of about 20 years. These 4 synchronisms to Egyptian chronology all refute the 607 BCE date for the desolation of Jerusalem and once again uphold 587-86 BCE as the correct date for that event. The evidence from all this material is overwhelming and should certainly be considered conclusive. For most scholars, just 2 or 3 of these 7 lines of evidence would be sufficient proof of the accuracy of the Neo-Babylonian chronology. For the leaders of the Watchtower Society, however, not even 7 lines of evidence are enough to change their minds, as shown by their consistent rejection of such evidence presented to them earlier. Since the chronology constitutes the very foundation for the major claims and message of the organization, they evidently feel that too much is at stake for abandoning their Gentile times chronology, not least of this being their own claimed position of divine authority. It is extremely unlikely, therefore, that even twice the number of lines of evidence will have any influence on their minds. For the sake of completeness, however, another 7 lines of evidence will be presented in detail in the next chapter, and a few others will be briefly described. As all of them are based on ancient Babylonian astronomical texts, they will be shown to turn the chronology of the whole Neo-Babylonian era into what is termed an absolute chronology.